Welcome back to the program, friends. James Corbett here at CorbettReport.com with this week's edition of Propaganda Watch. And this week I'd like to do an addendum or a follow-up of sorts to something that I talked about here on this series several months ago. You may remember way back in May, I had First They Came for Your Fingerprints edition of Propaganda Watch, in which we looked at a submission from a Corbett Report listener, Paul, who shared with us some scans from the April 1937 edition of Modern Mechanics magazine that he dug up from his attic that had a particularly interesting guest editorial by no less than FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, who there in Modern Mechanics magazine, in this guest editorial, was appealing to the public to send the FBI their fingerprints. In this edition of Modern Mechanics from April of 1937, he wrote a guest editorial which reads as follows. It's titled, Your Fingerprints, and it reads, quote, America can have widespread fingerprint identification only through education concerning its benefits. Here is an agency which can be looked upon by the average citizen as proof of identity and of good standing in a community. It must be looked upon as his protector in case of accident, amnesia, loss of identity, or death through circumstances which make his identification under ordinary means impossible. As conditions exist today, the criminal who is found dead may be returned to his loved ones for decent burial and the eradication of the uncertainty, the worries, the fears and torments which descend upon a family when one of its members has been lost for years. However, the honest citizen who dies under such circumstances and who is not protected by his fingerprint identification goes to a grave in a potter's field and his family sorrows for years in ignorance of his fate. I mean, you gotta give it to him. It's very colorful. It costs nothing to file a civil fingerprint card in the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington. There are now cards of 200,000 reputable citizens on file. Everyone's doing it. Why don't you? A total of 600 such cards are being received every day. There is no stigma to such a method of identification. It is a badge of honor. It should give one a standing in the community. It should be a letter of recommendation to any bank or insurance or business institution, and it should be the duty of good citizens everywhere to assume the leadership in this movement by preaching its usefulness to employees and friends everywhere. Sincerely, J. Edgar Hoover, Director, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now, you may remember at that time how we were laughing at the ridiculous nature of the old-timey propaganda in which J. Edgar Hoover could appeal to the public, oh, please send the FBI your fingerprints. We'll use it responsibly. We'll create a nice, safe database for everyone to trust. And we did laugh at the time at the idea that there was ever a time in which the American public would be credulous enough to believe something like that at face value. Of course, I'm sure some people saw through it, but the fact that they'd even go to the extent of putting a guest editorial in Modern Mechanics magazine requesting something of that sort goes to show how much they trusted that the public would fall for that kind of propaganda. And then, please do go back and rewatch that episode of the series if you haven't seen it, or watch it again, because obviously at that time I contrasted it to the clandestine way in which the FBI and its alphabet soup cronies has updated their game plan for the 21st century. Now they don't go writing guest editorials appealing for your fingerprints. Now they form deals with the DNA heritage databases and other such places that are collecting your genetic information, the 21st century of fingerprints, and they're creating a DNA database at the federal level. What could go wrong? So that is an important and interesting story, but maybe the premise of that podcast was wrong. Maybe we haven't moved past that point from the 1930s in which the FBI could go and just appeal to the public for their fingerprints. And I say this advisedly because this very idea has popped up in the news feeds quite recently. Let's turn to activistpost.com that had this article up quite recently. The FBI teams up with the post office to get your fingerprints. And this is by Max Slavo, who writes, the Federal Bureau of Investigation is teaming up with the highly efficient post office to make sure that they've got your fingerprints. Even though it wasn't that long ago that people were warned of sharing their DNA with ancestry sites, it seems they might have reason to be concerned now about the FBI's desire to snag your fingerprints too. Now the government has announced a new program in which they will hope people will voluntarily give their fingerprints. As the public has become more aware of such privacy concerns, it seems strange that on Friday, the Federal Bureau of Investigation announced a new partnership with the United States Postal Service, where customers can voluntarily provide them with their fingerprints while you're at the post office. And here's the FBI tweet. It says, through a partnership between the FBI and the USPS, you can now submit your fingerprints electronically for an identity history summary check, IDHSC, while you buy stamps or mail packages. Learn more about IDHSC and find participating post offices at blah, blah, blah. Surely all the bad guys will jump at the chance to give their fingerprints to the government, right? All right. So, and then they go through and highlight some of the responses that people have been making. One notable one from Senator Rand Paul, get a warrant. But actually, I would suggest you click through. Of course, I'll link up this tweet so you can go and click through. But the responses can be quite humorous. Are you effing kidding me? Laughing my ass off. What is this, China? I love to give up my privacy when shipping a gift to my mom. Can't you just get this information from the print scanner on my phone? LOL, no. One of those rare times when something is freaking wrong that it unites the right and the left. Postal clerk, do you need any stamps? Me, am I being detained? It's a trap. I mean, yeah, some funny responses. Which does go to show, thankfully, that at least the public isn't buying it. And it would be interesting to see if there were, live real-time comments in Modern Mechanics magazine from 1937, how much of the public would have been believing that Edgar Hoover editorial back from then. But it's amazing how everything comes full circle and everything old is new again, and they will keep going back to the same propaganda well and trying the same tricks over and over, seemingly expecting different results. Hey, there's a name for that, isn't there? Anyway, I thought this was a funny piece of propaganda that thankfully has blown up in the FBI's face, although I'm sure there's a much darker and more detailed story here, but we'll leave it at that since it is the holiday season and perhaps we don't want to make things too dark or heavy for today. Well, anyway, that's going to do it for today. James Corbett, CorbettReport.com.